Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And I just started to play my intro for everybody, and it dawned on me I didn't have it in the Queen. So I decided to do the show without it this time, and I do apologize for that, everybody. However, moving right along, today I'm going to be interviewing Johnny Fincham, and it's about his book, Palmistry Made Easy. Now, I haven't myself had a chance to read the book. However, I'm sure that he can tell me a little something about it. And, well, this is going to be a learning experience for me, as I'm not real up on this subject like I am some of the others. And you can learn more about him at www.johnnyfincham.com. And you also get more links to his books over there in that way. And you can purchase his books online at Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And I'm sure you can get it at other booksellers as well. If you scroll down below the chat room, below his picture there in his description, you'll see I got him linked over at Amazon. You can just click that anytime during the show or even after the show, and it'll take you right over there where you can get the book if you're interested. For those of you that want to call in, the call-in number is, I want to say 632-832-7904. I keep getting the first three numbers mixed up, and my webpage quit responding, so I'm having trouble scrolling up to where the number's at. So I have no clue why I decided to do that. Johnny, how are you doing today?
Hi, Royce. It's absolutely wonderful to speak to you. I'm doing great, thank you.
And I'm doing well as well. I'll get everybody the number just as soon as I can scroll the page up. But while we're waiting on that, well, hold on, it's scrolling now. Yeah, it's 832-632-7904. Please feel free to give us a call at any time and ask questions. Now, back to where we were at. Johnny, I usually like to start this out by suggesting that the guests kind of give them a little background about themselves to kind of break the ice and maybe tell everybody what led them to write the particular material they're writing about.
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. Well, it started about 20 years ago. I was a university student here in the UK, and I was doing English degree, and I got very seriously involved in a yoga group, and the yoga teacher one day read my hand, and it was so astonishingly accurate that I thought I'd have a go at it myself. So I started to learn palmistry, and I was enormously frustrated by the literature that's out there. All of the books say the same old things, which is quite a lot of complicated things taken straight from the old Hindu textbooks, and it's all a mass of complicated little crosses and squiggles and circles to remember, and it's very, very, very dated. It basically still started with this guy D'Arpignan, who was a Spanish guy who collated a sort of book of mystical gypsy sayings from his time in the War of the Peninsular War in 1790, and most books still use that as a sort of basic palmistry text, and it's extremely old-fashioned, and all of the old Hindu stuff is in there, and it's extremely difficult to understand. So out of sheer frustration and rage, I decided to start again and just to look at people's hands and to work out what's true, what works, and what doesn't. And that's really what led me to, in the end, become a palmist myself, because I want to do it in a different way, a different method. I'm not a predictive palmist. I don't believe that your hand has all these crosses and marks of fate that make everything fixed, because your lines of your hands change. They're so fluid. They might be broken today and they might slowly mend tomorrow. So your lines are actually reflecting your consciousness and your state of mind, and your hand is revealing an enormous amount about your inner nature and your personality. But it's not fixed, and it's extremely fluid. So my literature and my work and my study have all reflected that.
Okay. So this here book, though, it kind of breaks everything down in ways that the other books don't, and something kind of sort of an idiot's guide to palmistry, so to speak.
Yeah, if you like. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, there are certain basic principles. The first one is that your hand's simplicity, and by simplicity I mean if there are not very many lines and it's got just a few lines in it, tends to reflect a personality which is kind of what you see is what you get, a straight up sort of guy or woman, somebody who isn't going to waste too much time worrying, and somebody who's pretty much a person who gets on with the job. And a different type of hand is what's called a full or complex hand, which is covered with lots and lots of lines, millions and millions of them. And that would be a highly neurotic, highly strung, very nervous person with lots and lots of thoughts going on in their head all the time, and they tend to be very, very busy internally. And that very simple rule applies like so many other rules in hand reading. It's true every time you look at a hand. It never varies. It's a solid golden rule. And so my book is full of these sort of solid, well-proven facts which you can work your way through and somebody can easily test and observe, and which works every time. I haven't spent a lot of time telling you about a tiny little S-shaped mark which is on the base of the index finger where it crosses the Mount of Jupiter or whatever, which is what most palmistry books are full of and which are quite meaningless in my experience.
So it's sort of like a personality guide embedded in your actual handprint.
Absolutely. Absolutely, Rich. That's exactly right. Yeah. The hand is enormously, enormously reflective of your personality and all of the traits that you have. There are so many indicators of that. There's a lot of medical science and psychological ideas which now are creeping into hand reading. For instance, if your ring finger, your third finger, the one you'd wear your wedding ring on, if that's really, really long compared to your index finger, in my palmistry books, I've always seen this as a sign of somebody who's a little bit of a risk taker, somebody who is likely to want to show off, get a bit of public attention, somebody who has a strong need to want to be seen and recognized. And this has actually been proven to be true in scientific evaluation of personality, where they're using the length of this finger as being a guide to how much a person is willing to take risks in their life. So there's actually quite a lot of scientific backup to these ideas to show how they reflect personality, which is becoming more and more underlying the principles of modern palmistry.
You know, that's kind of interesting because I know recently it was on Facebook, they had a picture of different feet with their toes that were different, like it started from the big, went down to the little, and like a diagonal slanted line. It would mean you were from one place. If your toe right next to your big toe was taller than your big toe, it would mean you was from somewhere else, and so on and so on.
Yeah.
And what I'm getting at is really kind of amazing. I mean, because there's another one about sleep, that if you sleep on your side, well, left side it means one thing, your right side another, on your back another, shows something. It's amazing how many different ways they're starting to learn about the human nature, in other words.
Well, they've started to chart your hair thickness, and if each strand of your hair is extremely fine, you're likely to be an extremely sensitive person prone to allergies. And if you have very thick, coarse hair, you're likely to be a not-so-sensitive person who isn't going to pick up many allergies. So there are lots and lots of ways in which we're starting to register that our bodies and our features are reflecting our personality. And I think the hand is very important because the hand uses up almost a third of the brain surface, almost a third of your whole cerebral cortex is given over to the motor and neuron connections to your hand. So it's got a lot of information there about how you are, how you think, and what your personality is.
And the palm of the hand can tell you every last bit of that.
An enormous amount. There are certain things that are difficult. I mean, for instance, it's not that easy to tell whether you're looking at the palm just from the print anyway. It's not that easy to tell whether you're looking at a man or a woman. The gender difference isn't incredibly obvious. You have to look at quite subtle details. But certain things are extremely easy to see. For instance, the length of the headline or line of consciousness, if that's long and fine, that's going to tell you a lot about how well educated a person is and how clearly they think. Very simply put, if the headline is really fuzzy and dialanded and broken up, then somebody tends to not be able to concentrate very long. But if that line is very long and clear, they tend to be somebody with a high-functioning mental focus.
Okay. Now, in your book, do you have actual pictures to point to the actual line so the person will know which one is the conscious line, which one is the other line, and et cetera, to help demonstrate?
Yeah, the book is absolutely clear and obvious that you won't be able to make any mistakes from it because it's got every line is marked in a nice, simple way, and they're actually from real prints of people's hands, so they're not just crude drawings as you often see. Again, it's all about my own struggles to learn palmistry and to learn what made sense and what worked. And, struggling along myself, I was very clear that I wanted to make it nice and obvious and so that people couldn't make mistakes and they could recognize the features very simply. Yeah.
Okay, and then it has tells you after showing you the picture exactly what it does or what it means, etc., and how I'm assuming how it's useful to know this information.
Yeah. Everything there is marked in a very obvious and clear way. There are lots of parts of modern handreading which are new. For instance, the fingerprints, we call them, in handreading, we call the fingerprints the dermatoglyphics, which comes from the ancient Greek derma for skin and glyphic for marking. So the dermatoglyphics or fingerprint patterns are very powerful indicators, and we use them a lot, which you don't tend to find in the older palmistry books. They were only really started to be developed and looked at as signs of personality from about the 1960s, late 1960s, and now they are a very sophisticated part of your personality and your profiling. So to give you a couple of examples, if you have a lot of what we call simple loops, a loop is just like a rising and falling set of prints. They just tend to rise up and form a half a kind of loop shape. And most people have a lot of these. And if somebody has a full set of these, one on every finger, they tend to be very, very easygoing people. They tend to be very laid back, and they tend to be highly sociable. Whereas if you have a lot of what we call whirl prints are rather like a bullseye on a archery target where you have one circle around another and then another. So there's just a ring of set of concentric circles. If you had a lot of those on your fingertips, you would be a highly competitive, highly individualized person who would not socialize terribly easily, and you would be advised to work alone or in a very small group. You aren't going to be a person who's going to want to work with other people particularly. So those are a big part of modern handreading and play a very, very big role in allocating personality and helping people to be guided into the right kind of role or job in life.
Right. So the question that a person, or at least that I would have on something like this, if, for instance, a palm reader came up to me in the mall and asked to read my palm, and of course I've seen it on TV, and they tell you what these mean and, a little about yourself. But since you are you and you know about yourself, what's the benefit to you of having this done or doing it yourself?
That's a really good question, and one I have been asked a few times. Actually, I'm afraid we don't tend to know ourselves all that well. And I'll give you a good example. When I had my first reading, which was very, very good, which was given to me, the hand reader said, you're a very uptight person. You come across to everybody else being very laid back, but absolutely you're not at all. You're very, very uptight, very wound up, and you're not very spontaneous. And actually only I knew that. That wasn't something anybody else knew. I was very wound up. And he said, well, the reason for this is that you come from a very dysfunctional family and you've had to be very private and you've had to guard yourself a great deal and you've not been able to be a very open person. And he saw that and he saw the reason for it, and he unlocked an enormous amount of repressed rage and difficulty I'd had in my own life. And he saw that immediately in my palm, and that was very, very helpful to me. And he also said I had a lot of skills in writing, and that I would very likely go on to write a book because I had a natural writing talent. At the time, when I was studying English, I'd never written anything and did not particularly see writing as part of my life. And I started to explore that, and in fact, I did indeed go on to write, of course, lots of palmistry books, and I've written a novel and quite a lot of other things. So, yes, we kind of know ourselves, but there are lots of parts of ourselves and lots of deeper aspects of ourselves we are not aware of necessarily, which a palmist will be able to pick up at a very deep level. And there are always hidden traits and parts of us we hide away from, and parts of us we maybe don't want to look at too closely, that are, again, revealed in palmistry very well. Also our potentials, which we may not have explored. So there's a lot there. It's like looking into a map of your soul when you look into the hands. and there's always something there which you haven't yourself discovered, in my experience.
Okay. Now, you had a question in the chat room. He wants to know, when you're reading the head and heart lines, do you start from the thumb or the other side of the hand?
Well, that's nice and simple. The headline starts the thumb side. That's where it begins, at the top of the lifeline. And the heart line starts under the little finger, and it moves across the hand and then somewhere under the index finger or close to it, that kind of area. Yeah, you start at different sides for different lines. All the lines start in different places. All the lines have a similar beginning. Every single line on the hand, whoever hand you're reading, whether it happens to be a man from Siberia or a woman from South America, all of the lines always start off exactly the same position, but where they end up is very individual, and that tends to be very revealing. So your heart line starts under your little finger, but it could end up quite a few different places. It could actually join into your headline and become what's called a simian line and form just a single line, or it could end up, as most of them do, in the index finger area, or it could end up being very short or extra long. So it's that ending which tells us a lot about your individual way of connecting and relating.
Okay. Now, one of the things you were saying earlier before I moved on to the chat room's question was the guy actually went so far as to tell you why you were so reserved and what have you.
Yeah.
So is it normal for the hand to be able to tell you exactly how a person arrived at being the way that they are, to get you that, to, read that deep into a person, or does psychological play come into it?
There is a lot of psychology in hand reading, and there is a lot of you're looking at a person and thinking, well, I'm going to read this particular way because this person is a particular type. But I do think that the hand does reveal a lot of what we call the antecedents, the deep-rooted patterns for our behavior. I was looking at a guy's hand quite recently, in fact it was the day before yesterday, and he'd had a series of unsuccessful marriages, and they would always end because he was incredibly insatiably jealous, and it looked like there'd been a very unstable mother figure. And I said, well, it does look like your mother was never somebody you could rely on, and somebody that was forever running off, and in fact he hadn't really made that connection, but in fact his mother had let him down very badly and had ended up running away and deserting the family, and this is what led to his own insecurity and desperate jealousy. So you can't always pinpoint exactly. I could only say that something had happened within his nurturing experience from the mother's side that made him feel very vulnerable and insecure. I couldn't have exactly said that exactly what had happened to his mother, but I was able to locate much more closely and help make that connection for him, which I think when you understand the reasons for patterns of your behavior, it makes it much easier to not necessarily be a victim of that pattern.
Yeah. And it's probably why Thoth used to say, the Egyptian Thoth, to know yourself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. And there's a lot to know. There's a lot to get to know. And there's a lot of depths in our souls that we often do not plumb. Yeah.
Now, does palm reading, though, help you read a person's future?
Well, the way that the future works is that the future is being set up by what we're doing, what we're thinking, how we're feeling, and how our personality is. Character creates events. So, to go back to the example of the guy who had the unhappy marriages because of his jealousy was creating a series of relationships which were going bad because he was so possessive. So, fundamentally, one could look at his hand, see this possessiveness there, and say, well, look, you're going to find yourself in a relationship in 3 or 4 years, and it will start off brilliantly, and then you're going to find your partner will leave you, and she won't want to be anywhere near you anymore. And this will come about because you're going to lose your temper and get jealous. Now, that might be absolutely accurate, but, and it's a big but, I do think as long as we stay the same and do not change, then we are predictable. But if we are able to unlock our natures from our patterns and able to change that pattern, then our lines will change and our future will change.
Yeah, that's been pretty much my discovery, and I'm not even a palm reader. That
Right.
I mean, I've dealt in collections and marketing and stuff, and from what I've
Yeah,
noticed of people, is the only people who ever really change is the ones that get in there and deal with the actual root of the issue and correct the root.
absolutely. You're so right. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
since we know that if they don't correct that, they don't change, then yeah, they're predictable. They're going to keep repeating the same
Yeah,
loop over and over until such time as they either die or they finally catch snap and say, wait,
yeah, exactly so. Exactly so. It's like looking at a vehicle and seeing it's got a puncture and thinking, well, sooner or later this car's not going to be able to go any further. And of course, if they don't repair the puncture, that's inevitable. So your personality, the way you repeat the same patterns, creates your events, and they're unfolding all the time because of the way you are. And if you change your behavior, then your future, of course, will change. That's so true. Yeah.
since you can use the palm reading to help you get to the root of what's going on, then I guess you could also say that palm reading, rather than being a foreteller of the future, might be more so a changer of the future or a tool for changing the future.
Yes, I like to see it as a tool for changing the future. Yeah, absolutely. I like to see it as a way in which we can start to make choices where we didn't have a choice before. I'd like to see it as a way of sort of rearranging the map and redrawing the map of ourselves. And in the way that looking at the palm, it is a bit like a map because the lines are like rivers, and they're rivers of our consciousness flowing and going along in the particular ways and currents of which we make them move. And as they sort of unfold, we can alter that pattern and make the rivers change and shift to a slightly different place, and then our whole lives open up in a different place. So it is like a map of consciousness, and we can redraw that map once we understand what we're seeing. Yeah, that's right.
So that sounds like it's definitely pretty useful. And I take it you've been doing this palm reading for how long?
I've been doing about 20 years, probably a little bit more than that now. Yeah, I mean, I started when I was, let's see, I was in my mid-20s. I'm 50 now. So, yeah, it was, good. I've been professional for 20 years. I was more of a dabbler before that. It took me a while to kind of get going. I mean, one of the things that I think makes me successful is the fact that I've always offered all my clients a money-back guarantee. I've always said to them, look, don't pay me anything until the end of the reading, and only pay me if you're happy, and if you are not happy in any way, then don't pay me. And I think that gives both me and my client confidence that we're doing our best, that we're trying to be sincere, and we're trying to be honest, and try to do a good, honest piece of work.
I think that's wonderful, but aren't you a little concerned that you're kind of leaving yourself wide open for them to just say, I'm not happy, even if they are happy?
I think because hand reading demands honesty of ourselves, and in a way you can't really, if I'm reading your hand, you need to be honest with me. You need to sort of help me along in a way. If I ask you questions, I think it's very helpful if we can both start in a spirit of honesty and openness, and I think hand reading goes much better. If somebody was, trying to put one over on me, well, it probably wouldn't have been that great a reading. They wouldn't have got that much out of it. I mean, in all the years, I've only had 2 people ask for their money back.
Well, that's a pretty good history.
Not too bad, is it?
At the same time, since you've been doing it for so long, I'm curious, what kind of a success rate would you say you have? Like a 70% accuracy, a 90% accuracy?
Well, it's a bit tricky to give you an accurate answer because I can see, for instance, let me give you a good for instance. Say there's a break in the heart line, a break in the lifeline, and there are a lot of disruptive patterns around there. Now, I know that within a framework of, say, 5 years, somebody's had a very, very big disruption, a very, very big shock emotionally, and it's disrupted their life. They've had to move house and all sorts of things have happened. Now, probably that would be a divorce. And there'd be lots of signs that would help me see that it would be some kind of big disruption. But I may not be absolutely correct. It would, if I was just being crude, I said, look, 4 or 5 years ago you had an enormous disruption in your life. You were very heartbroken emotionally. You stopped functioning. You had to start all over again. That would be completely accurate. But if I was to say, look, you were with a man, he was an Australian, he was 6'2", tall. He wore spindly glasses, and he had a bit of a beard, and he drove a Pontiac. You know, if I was giving all that kind of detail, then I might well be a long way off the mark. So it depends how much detail you're furnishing into that statement. Do you understand me?
Yeah, I think I do. So, because a lot of it you can't possibly, you can't look at a guy's heart line and say, oh, he drives a Pontiac, for example.
No, exactly. No.
So, yeah, I can see where you're coming.
There are a lot of people who are what we call intuitive palmists, and they don't practice the skills of, if you like, evaluation and judgment and balancing the lines and looking into consciousness. They just basically look at the hand, feel the hand, and just deliver what their, if you like, their guide or their inner soul is telling them. And they can often make those kind of remarks. They can say that you had a relationship with an Australian with a pointed beard or whatever. On a good day, anyway, they might be able to do that. That's a different type of palmistry, and I think all palmists develop a certain intuition. But I do think that if you understand the palm thoroughly and well, it doesn't need your intuition to be fed in. You can give a very powerful and accurate reading, even if you are not particularly intuitive.
Okay. Yes, and I can see where you're coming from on that. What more
That's why the books are nice and simple, you see, because obviously I can't teach somebody intuition. I can teach you the techniques of modern hand reading, and I can teach you them in a very structured way, which is absolutely accurate, and which you can prove to yourself that it works. And you can read somebody's hand and read their personality and evaluate them very, very well and very successfully. But intuition is another angle altogether. Intuition is basically somebody using their, if you like, their inner understanding, their inner knowledge. And that could be just as accurate using tea leaves as using the hand. If you think about it, there's no need for those particularly to use the hand. That's just another way of connecting and understanding and getting, if you like, inner wisdom.
Right. Kind of like, sometimes you can use different tools out of a toolbox for the same job. You could use a wrench or a ratchet or a vice grip, for example, to get a nut off.
Exactly, and that's a different skill and a different way of gleaning information, but it's not necessarily part of the core techniques of palmistry. It's a helpful tool if you have it. Some people are very intuitive, and in my experience from people that are intuitive, some days they're great and some days they're not so great. Some days the clouds have misted up their horizons and they can't sort of pick up anything, and other days they tend to be flying and working very well, and that's a bonus. If you bring that to your palmistry readings as well, all well and good. But palmistry is so deep and so true and so accurate, you won't need to be intuitive to be able to read a hand well if you use modern techniques.
So, do you ever use this here for, say, entertaining at parties?
No, I find it too serious for that. I used to do a lot of parties and weddings and things. But when you're talking to somebody about the fact that they had a difficult relationship with their parent, or they have lots of issues about their sexuality being highly repressed or whatever, it tends to bring a lot of tears and a lot of difficulties all come out. And it's not really the environment for entertainment at all. It's too deep and too serious, frankly.
Okay. But you probably have had people in social settings that knew you were a palm reader that have asked you to do a reading while you were there, though, haven't you?
Oh, it happens all the time. In the street, in the newsagents, waiting for a bus, all the time. I try to just make one or two light-hearted comments on something I can see, without making it very clear to them that I'm not giving them full and proper reading. I would just sort of talk about some quality that they have. I mean, this morning, coming down from my local shop, a lady with a dog who I happen to know vaguely said, go on, say something. So I just sort of looked at her hand briefly and said, oh, you're incredibly sensitive, and people tend to think that you're thick-skinned, but in fact you tend to hold things in and you think and dwell on matters for a long, long time after. Just something like that, I said. And, she looked suitably impressed. Just little comments like that is what I tend to do to get through those sort of situations. It takes a good hour to read a hand, maybe longer, 90 minutes sometimes.
Really?
It isn't something, it isn't something you want to skip through and treat lightly. Yeah.
Because, when you see this done on TV, it usually takes place in a couple, 3 or 4 minutes. And that's pretty misleading from what you're telling me. So why does it take so long?
Well, you have to go through what I call different frames. You start off with what's called the fixed patterns, which are basically the instinctive self. So you work that through the palm shape, the thickness of the bones, the heaviness of the flesh on the hand, and the very deep primal qualities of a person. Then you look at the central nervous system and how sensitive they are and how complex they are, how many lines they have. Do they have a lot? Do they have a few? Do they have long lines, short lines? Work out their basic energy levels. And then you go from there to what we call histrionics, or what I call the patterning. And that's much more to do with the past, how successfully they were reared and how successful their relationship with their parents were and how well nurtured they are and how secure they are. And then you look at creativity, fulfillment, work, relationships, and you build up these sort of patterns one on top of another. It's like putting a little house up, starting with the foundations, the basic, and building the house on top of it. And then I usually do a little bit on the health areas where the person might have a few vulnerabilities, and work through the print patterns. It takes about an hour to do all that lot.
Wow, I had no idea it was that in depth.
Yeah. I mean, I used to do 3-hour readings for people that lived a long way away. Sometimes people flew in from, actually a guy once flew in from US just for a reading. When people come a long way, I think I owe it to them to do a proper, slow, deep reading. So I'll often do 2 or 3 hours in those sort of circumstances, but usually it's about an hour and a half.
Well, I think it's nice you want to be as thorough as possible for them.
Yeah, exactly. And also, some people come for follow-ups. I mean, about half of my clients are follow-up readings, which means I've read their hands, 3 or 4 years ago, and they've come back for another go, and we're going to compare the prints then and see how much their lines might have changed since last time I saw them.
Okay, we got another question in the chat room. Have you ever read your own palm to the same extent that you read someone else's palm?
I'm afraid I'm rather terrible at reading my own palm. I have another hand reader friend who does it. I'm not really objective enough, and I suppose that's a good point in that the more you know somebody and the more you know about them, the worse your reading tends to be, because it kind of clouds your horizons and makes it difficult for you to make a fresh and original set of statements about a person. So generally, no, I don't read my own hand, or at least only in the crudest sense. And the more you already know, the more you tend to be preloaded and you don't come fresh to a person. It's better to work with complete strangers, in my experience.
See, I'm learning a lot out of this here show. Now, I want to remind everybody, his website is www.johnnyfincham.com. And you can buy his book at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and probably a lot of the bookstores and all the malls in your city, wherever you live, I would imagine. And if you want to call in and ask Johnny any questions, the number is 832-632-7904. And now I wanted to also mention to you, Johnny, that now would be a good time probably for you to tell them about other books you've written.
I've written about 4 palmistry books. The biggest selling one is called Palmistry, Apprentice to Pro in 24 Hours. That probably outsells all of the others by 10 times over. That's probably the world's best-selling palmistry book, or sometimes it is, depends, how the Amazon ratings go up and down. And that was my first, if you like, my most successful, simple explanation of palmistry. I wrote that particularly for people to begin with no knowledge whatsoever and just to work through a series of lessons. And then there's a lot of little tests at the end of each chapter and lots of little reminder points and lots of little exercises to do. And that one is probably by a mile my bestseller. And then I've got a harder, heavier book, if you like, which is called The Spellbinding Power of Palmistry. And that's pretty heavy going for the beginner, certainly. That's much more for your professional, more serious palm reader that maybe already knows and understands some of the main points of palmistry. And the Spellbinding Power of Palmistry is definitely a more advanced book with stuff on health reading and psychology and emotional and sexual reading, and that tends to take one to a quite deep level. But I would definitely say I wouldn't start with that book. I would definitely start with one of the others, because the other ones all tend to be easier.
Okay. Now, do you have any kind of workshops or anything that you can invite people to?
Well, I've tried for ages to try to set up online workshops for Palmistry. They don't really tend to work very well because there's a lot of visuals and a lot of sort of feeling and grabbing hold of hands and bending fingers back and sensing the skin texture and that kind of thing. You really need the hands-on physical and sensual experience of touching and feeling hands. So I do quite a few international workshops. I've done some in Moscow. I've done quite a few in France. There's a centre in France that I work from usually once a year. I do a lot of workshops here in the UK, and I fly out to mainly Europe. I haven't been out to the USA, but I've been to Spain, Portugal, France, Moscow, the Arab Emirates, Ireland, Northern Ireland, Scotland, quite a few places like that, and people have sort of paid me to come out and do a full, complete palmistry beginners workshop, 3-4 days, and so I've done quite a lot around Europe, and I do 2 or 3 workshops a year. I recently become a daddy for the first time, so that's rather limited my movement somewhat, but I still am teaching 1 or 2 courses a year, keeping that going.
So you think Junior would take up the family tradition?
I'm really, really hoping so. He's got a very long headline, which is a very good sign for a palmist. So it looks promising so far. But if he's anything like me, he'll turn out to be a wild boy and be really rebellious for the first 10 years before he settles down and does what he wants to do.
I think that goes for a lot of people, especially in years of my generation.
Yeah, totally.
That was kind of like the norm for everybody back then.
Yeah, I think our experience has made us richer people in many respects, made us richer, wiser people by going off the rails a little bit.
I think you've probably got something there too. So what I was going to ask you, I got to stop and think about it because I had a brain fart. But I did have a question on the tip of. Oh yeah, I remember now. What kind of audience would you recommend your book to? Any kind of audience whatsoever, or you think some people might get more use out of it than others?
Well, interestingly enough, my books tend to do very well with quite literary and quite level-headed type people, what you might call not your obvious New Age or spiritual types, lots of mathematicians, academics, accountants. Loads of my courses get very, what you might call quite sort of standard, straight-up kind of people, as well as getting the more open, spiritual type people as well. So, I do think, and I hope that I've written the books so that anybody can grasp them. There are a lot of stuff there on psychology and the way that human behavior is manifest. And I think all people are interested in understanding people better, whether we want to understand our parents, our family, or our partner, our boyfriend, girlfriend. I think it's very useful to have a tool like palmistry, even if we only understand a few basic principles, that can give us a lot of insight in helping us to understand other people. And so I do feel the books are for everybody.
Okay. I just did that again. I had one on the tip of my tongue just a minute ago. I don't believe I'm doing that. I must not have had enough coffee today.
These sparks fly off and they burn out very quick unless you harness them quickly, don't they? You know how it is. Yeah.
Well, usually mine don't, leave so quickly. But like I say, we all have our little off days.
Yeah,
and we blame it on coffee or Coke or, whatever the addiction is.
Yeah. Well, let me answer the question that everybody asks me, and that is, if you have a big break or a hole in your lifeline, does it mean you're going to die young? That's the question.
I never heard that one.
Really? Yeah, I've asked that all the time. And the lifeline is not a reflection of how long you're going to live. The lifeline is much more about how grounded, how secure, how fixed, and how stable you are. Now, in medieval times, when they very first started to practice palmistry here in Europe, if you were unstable, you probably wouldn't live long. In the old feudal system, nobody had anything surprisingly good happen. If there was a surprise or a shock or a change in life, it would be disease, death, famine, or war. Nothing good happened. So there was an association where people became transient and were disrupted in their lives. They tended to not survive, whatever that transient situation was. So that's where the tradition of the break or hole or space in the lifeline came from. But in the modern world, it simply means that you are more likely to be a slightly more unstable person, a more insecure person, someone who's likely to travel and to change and to reinvent themselves, and somebody who's more likely to jump at opportunities and maybe abandon fixed patterns in life to try out different things. So a break in the lifeline isn't going to kill you. In fact, it's probably going to help you to live longer because you're going to try more different ideas out. But it is going to make it more difficult for you to remain stable and fixed in life, and you're going to probably jump around rather more than most. That's the meaning of it.
Okay. And while you were covering that, it reminded me of what I was going to ask you. Do you know of any scientists out there that are trying to find a scientific basis for how palmistry works?
Well, there are a lot of scientists actually working on the dermatoglyphics on the fingerprints, and a lot of scientists are working on human behavioral traits relating to the finger lengths. There's a particular scientist here in the UK called Dr. John Manning. He has written 3 or 4 books. One is called the Handbook or the Finger Book, and it's basically about different personality traits exhibited by those with a very long index finger or a very long ring finger or a very long pinky finger. It's very much about personality and the way the hand's finger length shows developmental traits. So there are some scientists working very hard on different areas of the palm, and the fingerprints are hugely researched. There are something like 5,000 or 6,000 medical papers on fingerprints and their dispositions towards different diseases and different personality types. So the one thing scientists never want to go anywhere near is the lines. The lines of the palm are so associated with mysticism, prediction, palmistry, and the whole kind of spiritual and esoteric issues that they will not go within a million miles of the line, so they don't want to have any connection with them. But also no scientist, to my knowledge, has had any research papers or any interest particularly in the lines of the hand. But yes, there's a lot of scientific interest, as I say, in the fingers, the finger length, and in the print patterns on the fingertips.
Okay. So somebody that's missing their fingers, it might make it difficult to do an accurate palm reading.
People have fingers missing here and there. I've certainly read people with a finger missing. I mean, ultimately, bear in mind the finger is reflecting the personality, and it's reflecting a lot of the brain's activity, but the hand is not actually the personality. So the missing finger, as it were, will show some disposition or some pattern that's missing in some psychological way, but the person can still function perfectly well. It is obviously more limiting. It's unusual that somebody will not have all four fingers and thumb on at least one of their hands, which we can use. By the way, I should mention we tend to always read both hands because one hand is your passive and one is your active hand. So your passive hand is the one you use the least, and this is much more reflective of your deeper inner personality, the person you are to your mother, to your deepest, closest friends, to your partner. And the other hand is much more your exhibited personality, the personality you're trying to become, and the personality which you show to the outside world.
Yeah, I was just fixing to ask you, is it possible to look at, read, both hands and get a different reading, in other words?
Yeah. Basically, the greater the difference between your two hands, if the lines are very different and the shape is different, then the more your personality has a massive difference between the inner and outer. It tends to be more of a bipolar personality if you have massive differences between the two palms, and it will also show that you have an enormous change and enormous developmental qualities in your personality that will change hugely as you grow up.
So then there's a hope you might even outgrow the bipolar as you grow up?
Yes, indeed. You might well do. You're going to change enormously. Yeah.
I think there's probably a lot of sense in that, and I'm no psychiatrist either, but I've often thought that perhaps a lot of these disorders that they're not really labeling as mental illness, like bipolar, depression, and that, are either symptoms from days during drugs could cause depressions, for example, or in some cases, they were really just areas in which people have not matured yet, and they're labeling them as disorders.
Yeah, I think a lot of basic normal personality traits are becoming increasingly labeled as disorders because then the drug manufacturers can make fortunes selling us drugs to fix them. Yeah, I think, there's an enormous variance in the human being.
I mean, here lately they've been talking about wanting to add the road rage to the book of with the list of disorders in it, so they can pop pills in you for road rage. I mean, that kind of think it gives it is a bit of a dead giveaway on it, don't you think?
Yeah, it's ludicrous. It's just saying you're not responsible for your actions. It's all down to some condition you have. Here's a tablet for it. It's just crazy. It's all about the breaking down of any sense of responsibility and self-control that we tend to be increasingly suffering from as the human race advances and more is done by us or on our behalf by others. And we have less and less a sense of empowerment. So it tends to be more of a greater blaming society, I think, where we tend to be able to kind of transfer the power to other people. It's all crazy. It's all part of the crazy side of the modern world.
But it makes a lot of sense. I mean, the crazier people get, the more out of control they get, the more they prove that they need somebody standing over them holding their hand.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
You need government. You need rule. You can't rule yourself. You have to have pills. But so that proves you can't rule yourself.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think one of the disadvantages of the great kind of explosion of culture in the 60s and 70s is that everything relating to the old-fashioned values of self-discipline, inner strength, self-control, harnessing your power, being somebody that had a strong sense of right or wrong, is all kind of been thrown out of the window. And maybe we've kind of thrown those things out a little bit too readily. Yeah,
that's probably true. I mean, people with a good sense of right and wrong these days seem to be relics.
Yeah, they are, and they tend to be condemned for it too, don't they? Yeah.
So, do you think palmistry could actually, maybe if a person was using it to learn more about themselves, could help a person overcome some of these disorders?
Yes, I do. I really do. Everybody's hand you ever look at always has some amazing quality. There's always some amazing strength or creativity or wit or cleverness or depth or skill. There's always something rather brilliant there, and there's always something rather dark there, something a little more difficult, something a bit of a shadow, something they're perhaps not so comfortable with. In everybody, that's perfectly normal and part of human nature. But you can actually watch the hands slowly developing qualities like self-control and confidence. And these things can be nurtured and grown just like any other skill.
It's interesting. So, got to ask you this before I forget to ask you this. On your book, did you have any goals in mind by writing a book by which people could learn palmistry? I mean, because a lot of people would say, well, if I teach them this, they're not going to need to come to me. Well,
basically, I just want to make palmistry available to everybody because I think it's amazing. I just think it's an absolutely wonderful tool to be able to help us understand each other. And if we understand each other, we tend to be much, much more sympathetic and much, much kinder to each other. So palmistry is a wonderful tool to let us connect and understand and relate to each other better. And it's a simple tool, but it's a very, very, very effective one. And so I just want everybody to be able to use it.
Well, is there any way that reading a palm can help you tell if somebody's lying to you or not?
Well, even liars are sometimes truthful. You can certainly see if somebody has the capacity to bend the truth. And if somebody has the capacity to not be honest with themselves, but that doesn't necessarily mean you could tell they were lying to you there and then. That would take different skills of reading body language, I suspect. So no, I don't think, be able to tell that somebody was lying to me directly. I would only see that they have the capacity to be generally honest or generally mistrustful in their behavior.
Right. But reading the palm can, however, help you to understand where the other person's coming from by revealing things that they're not perhaps saying out loud.
Yeah. A lot of us hide a lot of things. Yeah. We don't like to show our darker side to others. We don't like to show them our fear and our desperation, our insecurity, or our need to be liked. All these things tend to be hidden. With the palm shows them very clearly.
I don't want to tell you why your behavior's upsetting me, because you'll think I'm a crazy person that I let it bother me in the first place.
Yeah.
Something like that, huh?
Yeah, exactly.
Which, in all honesty, a lot of people do. I mean, we live in a society today that very few people, I don't care what kind of, history you have for honesty, they don't believe half of what you say. They believe what they think your agenda is behind the scene, in other words.
Yeah, we're kind of breaking down any consensual sense of what is the truth, aren't we? I mean, there are half a dozen versions of history now. It depends on what kind of particular cause you're a part of. I think that's all part of the kind of breakdown of the structure of society. And I think probably are going to be like a little bit like the old Bible, the old Tower of Babel, where it broke down and we stopped being able to understand and agree on anything anymore. That's probably part of the great changes which are sweeping into society. It's probably going to get a lot worse before it gets any better.
Yeah, I would say probably a heck of a whole lot worse. But it seems to me like there would have to be I guess you could call it a crux point where everything just comes in and comes to a boil, I guess you could say.
Yeah. In the end, we have to come down to some basic facts. The world is actually round. We are all actually going to die. Everything does actually change and decompose and retransgress. And there are certain fundamental truths we have to sort of start right back down to and then work back up again from. There are certain things that are inescapably true and you can't put a bias or a spin on it. It's just how things are.
Okay. And is there any way possible that your palm lines can in any way reveal health issues?
Yeah, they can. It's not just the lines, though. You have to look at the skin ridges very closely and carefully. You look at the nails. The nails are ever so helpful in terms of health analysis. The color of the nails, the shape of them, the marks and grooves on them, the moons, whether they're present or not. That in conjunction with the lines and the skin texture and the quality of the mounts, how well formed they are, how warm the temperature of the hands are, that can be very helpful in a health analysis.
Okay. Now, we're getting close to being out of time. Is there anything you'd like to cover that I haven't thought to ask?
Gosh, we seem to have covered most of the whole area, I think. I would probably say that most people are desperate these days to have their hand read. In the time that I've been reading, there's been more and more confusion, I think, amongst us individuals, and we are more and more lost about who we are and where we're going. And one thing I've noticed that's more and more missing in the hand is what's often called the fate line. I tend to call the fate line the life path line because I think it tells you what it does. But the life path line or fate line is very much a line of character that gives us a clear sense of who we are, where we're going, what we want, right and wrong, and tends to give us a clear sense of having well-established patterns and character traits and hobbies and habits and things. And this line tends to be vanishing from people's hands. We tend to be sort of moving in a world where we don't quite know who we are anymore. We don't really know ourselves terribly well. We don't tend to find ourselves very easily in life. So I think that's one of the great common qualities of modern life, is it's sort of stopping us from being able to get familiar with ourselves because we're all trying to become some other exterior personality we picked up from the media.
Okay. Now, everybody listening, I would like to remind y'all that tonight at 7 is my regularly scheduled Wednesday night show. And my guest is going to be Georgia Love. We're going to talk about her book, Escape from Manhattan. And it's probably not going to be conversation that's going to stay on topic. We're going to probably also cover areas like 911 and other issues like big pharmacies and, Big Brother and other things that's major issues that's going on in the world today. Because actually a lot of those issues are really a part of our book, especially on toward the end, if y'all would find if y'all decide to go ahead and get the book. And then this tomorrow, I will be doing my weekly show over at Revolution Radio. If y'all want to join me over there, it's www.freedomslips.com. I'm going to be interviewing Carl O'Helby, and he says that he has actually beat lung cancer, and he's got a book out that can tell everybody else things they can do to beat cancer. So if y'all have cancer, you'd be a good person to want to watch this show and to catch it. And I want to thank everybody for listening. I couldn't have a show without my listeners anymore, and I could have one without a guest. Unless, of course, I just want to go talking to the air, which I've been thinking about that actually sometimes. But, I've been hearing other people do solo shows, and I've been thinking if they can do it, why can't I, in other words? So, in the meantime, I'd like to also let everybody know that I no longer have the URL at www.talknowradio.com. I gave that one up for a .net instead because the guy I got my domain name from, Bravehost, their DNS records where you can go in and change them were kind of restrictive. I was having trouble securing my email server, and I went to transfer it over to Comcast, and it didn't transfer completely. So I decided, what the heck, just get a whole new domain from Comcast, and I can secure the domain name for the .net one, and just let that other one go. And when it expires, maybe I could get it through Comcast and get it back. But for now, I'm just going to let it sit, and I'm going to redirect anybody that goes to that. Here, I've already got a picture up and a link up coming back to this page. And in the meantime, look for you this evening. I hope you'll have a good supper. I really enjoyed our talk, Johnny, and I was kind of hoping that you could come back to my show in the future.
Yeah, I'd love to. I've had a great time. I really enjoyed it, Rooster. Thank you very much.
And also, one last detail. For those of you that didn't make the show live, there will be a copy on my website, a copy at YouTube, and a half a copy at Daily Motion. And I'll be sending you the links to those, by the way, Johnny, as soon as I get them up.
Great. Fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, with that, I'm going to call this a wrap. Everybody have a good day, and I'll see y'all this evening.
I started to learn palmistry, and I was enormously frustrated by the literature that's out there. All of the books say the same old things, which is quite a lot of complicated things taken straight from the old Hindu textbooks, and it's all a mass of complicated little crosses and squiggles and circles to remember, and it's very, very, very dated. It basically all started with this guy D'Arpignan, who was a Spanish guy who collated a sort of book of mystical gypsy sayings from his time in the War of the Peninsular War in 1790, and most books still use that as a sort of basic palmistry text, and it's extremely old-fashioned, and all of the old Hindu stuff is in there, and it's extremely difficult to understand. So out of sheer frustration and rage, I decided to start again and just to look at people's hands and to work out what's true, what works, and what doesn't. And that's really what led me to, in the end, become a palmist myself, because I want to do it in a different way, a different method. I'm not a predictive palmist. I don't believe that your hand has all these crosses and marks of fate that make everything fixed, because your lines of your hands change. They're so fluid. They might be broken today and they might slowly mend tomorrow. So
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Talk Now Radio. This is your host, Royce the Redneck Radio Man. And I just started to play my intro for everybody, and it dawned on me I didn't have it in the Queen, so I decided to do the show without it this time, and I do apologize for that, everybody. However, moving right along, today I'm going to be interviewing Johnny Fincham, and it's about his book, Palmistry Made Easy. Now, I haven't myself had a chance to read the book. However, I'm sure that he can tell me a little something about it. And, well, this is going to be a learning experience for me, as I'm not real up on this subject like I am some of the others. And you can learn more about him at www.johnnyfincham.com. And you also get more links to his books over there in that way. And you can purchase his books online at Barnes & Noble or Amazon. And I'm sure you can get it at other booksellers as well. If you scroll down below the chat room, below his picture there in his description, you'll see I got him linked over at Amazon. You can just click that anytime during the show or even after the show, and it'll take you right over there where you can get the book if you're interested. For those of you that want to call in, the call-in number is,
hand reading. It's true every time you look at a hand. It never varies. That's a solid golden rule. And so my book is full of these sort of solid, well-proven facts which you can work your way through and somebody can easily test and observe, and which works every time. I haven't spent a lot of time telling you about a tiny little S-shaped mark which is on the base of the index finger where it crosses the Mount of Jupiter or whatever, which is what most palmistry books are full of and which are quite meaningless in my experience.
So it's sort of like a personality guide embedded in your actual handprint.
Absolutely, Rich. That's exactly right. Yeah, the hand is enormously reflective of your personality and all of the traits that you have. There are so many indicators of that. There's a lot of medical science and psychological ideas which now are creeping into hand reading. For instance, if your ring finger, your third finger, the one you'd wear your wedding ring on, if that's really, really long compared to your index finger, in my palmistry books, I've always seen this as a sign of somebody who's a little bit of a risk taker, somebody who is likely to want to show off, get a bit of public attention, somebody who has a strong need to want to be seen and recognized. And this has actually been proven.
Say 632-832-7904. I keep getting the first three numbers mixed up, and my webpage quit responding, so I'm having trouble scrolling up to where the number's at. So I have no clue why I decided to do that. Johnny, how are you doing today?
Hi, Royce. It's absolutely wonderful to speak to you. I'm doing great, thank you.
And I'm doing well as well. I'll get everybody the number just as soon as I can scroll the page up. But while we're waiting on that, well, hold on, it's scrolling now. Yeah, it's 832-632-7904. Please feel free to give us a call at any time and ask questions. Now, back to where we were at. Johnny, I usually like to start this out by suggesting that the guests kind of give them a little background about themselves to kind of break the ice and maybe tell everybody what led them to write the particular material they're writing about.
Yeah, sure, I'd love to. Well, it started about 20 years ago. I was a university student here in the UK, and I was doing English degree, and I got very seriously involved in a yoga group, and the yoga teacher one day read my hand, and it was so astonishingly accurate that I thought I'd have a go at it myself. So your lines are actually reflecting your consciousness and your state of mind, and your hand is revealing an enormous amount about your inner nature and your personality. But it's not fixed, and it's extremely fluid. So my literature and my work and my study have all reflected that.
Okay. So this here book, though, it kind of breaks everything down in ways that the other books don't, and something kind of sort of an idiot's guide to palmistry, so to speak.
Yeah, if you like. Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, there are certain basic principles. The first one is that your hand's simplicity, and by simplicity I mean if there are not very many lines and it's got just a few lines in it, tends to reflect a personality which is kind of what you see is what you get, a straight up sort of guy or woman, somebody who isn't going to waste too much time worrying, and somebody who's pretty much a person who gets on with the job. And a different type of hand is what's called a full or complex hand, which is covered with lots and lots of lines, millions and millions of them. And that would be a highly neurotic, highly strung, very nervous person with lots and lots of thoughts going on in their head all the time, and they tend to be very, very busy internally. And that very simple rule applies like so many other rules in hand.